We're speaking to John Symes, correct?
Yeah, John Symes. Yep.
John Symes, author, mentor, speaker, and works with men to help us become whole and free. I had the privilege of just doing a brief conversation with him last week, and the man has an interesting light or perspective of actually moving forward and going past boundaries. How you doing, John?
I'm doing really well. I enjoyed our conversation last week. I'm looking forward to seeing where we can take it today.
Me too. It was last week. I was just thinking about. I was like, wow. I always enjoy these conversations of what does the resistance of the unknown look like, and we were just talking about your language compared to my language, and very similar. But so, what is some of the resistance that you're seeing with people for moving forward?
Well, I think I don't always think about it as resistance. I think the way I think and the way I try and help people picture what's going on is the to talk about the stories that we're enacting. And as we as men, we were brought up on a whole bunch of stories. And the stories might be things that were explicitly told us by a dad, a father figure, or an uncle, or a teacher who might have said, boys do this, boys don't do that. And the classic example, and the one that almost everyone can identify with, is boys don't cry.
Hmm.
So the first time you skinned your knee and you cried, and somebody probably said, boys don't cry. And that went in somewhere. You might have had a clip around the ear with it, or you might have just been told. And so that's an example of a story that you were told about what it is to be a boy, a man, and how you would then modify your behavior according to that story. And so I tend to talk about the stories that we have unconsciously assimilated, that we've taken on and that we're living out. And so things that are resistance or things that are self-sabotaging, I think usually come from the stories we're telling ourselves.
So, using the word stories, when I like to look at stories and looking at books or what type of
Mm.
stories that they're sharing, what are some of the areas that you help people rewrite or subtract from the stories? How do you help them have a different narrative of the story that they've been telling?
Well, there are some common stories, and we can talk about what those are, and then we can talk about the process of getting free of them. Um, but the common stories are often around um, not showing our emotion.
Hmm.
They're around not asking for help.
Hmm.
They're around getting the job done, being independent and capable. And then we put men in a family context or a group context, and we've then got this situation of becoming the provider. I'm gonna focus on making sure I provide for everybody. The story of protecting the people that we love. These are common stories that most of the men listening will identify with somehow, and they have a huge toll on us. I work with men who are so adhered to the role of providing that they'll work all hours, they'll work two jobs, they'll bust a gut in order to bring money home and put food on the table at the expense of the relationship with their kids, at the expense of the relationship with their partner, and often at the expense of their own health. And so we're playing the story of being a good provider, but it's costing us dear in the process. And that story is really common. And then the story about not showing our emotions or not showing our feelings has men really clamped down on how we communicate, and that costs us in relationship to our loved ones, whether they're our partners or our kids or other people in our family. So some of these most common stories are really pervasive, and they're doing damage every day to us as men. Yeah.
When I think about these stories, I like to go historically. And because these are not just the stories that our fathers told us, these are usually the stories that have been passed on from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And when we were actually hearing these stories had a service or service them one way or another. But in today's day and age, it doesn't serve us. Like the where boys don't cry, where boys are, it's okay to be angry. And primitively, when we were in survival mode, yeah, it was okay. But now we're in this realistically the safest time in history of mankind. I know some people might disagree with me, but when we were actually looking at these stories, how do we help somebody realize these stories served our parents okay, but they're
Yeah.
no longer, they're shackling us from being able to move forward.
Yeah. So I think the first step we have to take, Will, is we have to become aware that there is a story that's running us.
Hmm.
And it's a bit like the operating system. Lots of the choices you and I make in every single day are choices that we're making unconsciously. There are very few decisions come up to the level of, working out the pros and cons rationally and then taking a decision. The speed I'm driving at, the tone of voice when I phone customer service, the way I'm going to interact with my partner, those decisions don't come from rational thought. They're unconsciously driven.
Hmm.
And so the first step is to actually realize there is an unconscious operating system composed of stories that's driving us. And we go like, oh, okay, so let's slow down what just happened. So, the time most people get interested in this is when something's going wrong or not working for them. So let's slow it down. I just had an interaction. I just actually this morning had an interaction with customer service, and I didn't lose my cool, but I was agitated because it was taking this super long time to get an answer about something I think the bank should have already sorted out for me. So I've got a story that says that I have an expectation about a level of service that I should be getting. So
Hmm.
the first thing is like, why did I lose my cool a little bit? Well, okay, it was because I had an expectation that wasn't met. Where's that expectation come from? Well, I was brought up to think that customer service should put the customers first, and so if I slow it down, I can find the story, and I go like, then I can interrogate the story and say, do I want to keep this story? Is
Mm.
it costing me anything? Does this, because stories aren't necessarily bad. There are some amazing stories that inspire us and help us move forward and keep us optimistic. And so we then have to say, well, what's the impact of the story? And the impact of the story is if I lose my equilibrium because I'm not getting the service I think, then I don't want to live like that. I don't want to be the angry guy on the phone. So I'm going to say, well, okay, well, actually, I might have to adjust the story I'm telling myself about customer service interactions. And we might all have to do that today because customer service is so universally terrible. It's underfunded everywhere, isn't it? You sit on some sort of automated switchboard and you wait for somebody who's the job's been outsourced to somebody in a place where the labor is likely cheaper. So we might all need to adjust our stories around that one. But that's
It's
the key thing. Recognize that there's a story, and then see what it's costing us.
like it's interesting. So there was multiple things I was thinking about, like customer service. We can go down that rabbit hole, but I don't think it really do as much service besides that they found out a way that was automated. While you get a person frustrated enough, they'll just hang up and they'll just eat crow. And then they have it now not even being outsourced. They're using AI to be able to have an understanding of the human experience. But I do love the fact that you bring up the story where what we are expecting, what is it that we believe should happen. I do this, this should happen this way, or the probability of this happening is high. Like when I think about the emotions of, so part of my classes I'm taking right now is when we show up for a person, did we do a body scan before we actually showed up for them? So that we are not projecting our energy towards that person.
Right.
And if we are able to do that, we're able to lower our energy so we're not actually hitting each other and speaking past each other, but we're showing up the best way we can going forward. But the story that I was told when I was a kid was very different. And it really took falling on my face multiple times until I realized that, hey, this story no longer serves me.
Right.
And but the situation that I was really enjoying about our conversation was, what happens when we take their story out of the book and we burn it? Now is a void. And
Yeah.
how does that look like? And how do we learn how to navigate rewriting it in the words that we understand so that we're able to comprehend and have an easier way to go back to that automated system?
Well, you've really just hit the key thing, Will, because you're the author of your own story. So, so in the case where you've found a story that didn't serve, and you're choosing not to engage with that, there is a void, and the void needs to be filled. Because if we don't fill that void, the old story is the only thing that's available to us. So that'll come back in and guide the decisions of that moment or that circumstance. So I think the key step is, well, I know the key step is to deliberately create, author a new story. So, and we could work with the example that you're thinking of. In my customer service example, I probably want to reframe that I'm talking to a human being who, if I'm not nice to them, they probably can't give me the service I'm looking for. So
Mhm.
it's in my best interest to help them help me. That's a pretty good story. In your circumstance, I don't quite understand enough of the story that you've gotten rid of, but what's the story you would like to adopt in terms of what happens when you encounter other people and the energies are matching or not?
So my understanding of how to look at it, mine was overcome by force. I was taught at a young age how to use my hands. I was a very scrappy guy. I joined the United States Marine Corps. You learn about strength overwhelmed to compliance. Or if you look at war throughout the generations, it's we will have peace by making people surrender to us.
Right.
Well, what that does, it actually puts people in fear and we lose the connection.
Yeah.
And the way that I've understood my story is, if I look at only the things in black and white, I don't see shades of gray. If I can see shades of gray, I'm still not seeing color.
Right.
And I believe when we start writing these stories, we realize that we're not just the only operator in the story. Everybody's independent from us, and they all have their own emotional baggage that they're bringing into this. Like if we go back to the customer service person, they might have had a pleasant morning, but woke up and the first person that called them was not nice.
Yeah.
And they haven't been able to shake that residual of that entitlement. And then all of a sudden to hear your voice, like, huh, I'm giving this guy an attitude because I have the power. But now, if you're able to help them reframe it, you'll be like, thank you so much for taking the time and even killing him with kindness.
Yeah.
And but when I think about this, I think about it as, how can we rewrite that story even while we're actually interacting with somebody?
Yeah.
Because if we don't understand the emotions of the person and we are actually only forcing our agenda, it's becoming very transactional and it actually becomes very finite of a.
Yeah. Plus, it's a zero sum. Either
Mhm,
you win or they win.
mhm.
And you cut. So, what came to mind when you were talking about thank you for telling me more about that story about force over and getting people to bend to our will. And so the replacement story might be something about, might be that we're not in competition or conflict with other people, but actually the best is going to be when we're dancing together with them and dancing. Because if you've got two or more people dancing, but let's stick with two just because we can see it so easily.
Mhm.
It's like you're both doing different things, but there's the movements, the rhythm is gelling, and together what you create is better than either of you could create on your own.
Mhm.
In fact, you couldn't have that dance without the partner. So you've got this. You can reframe so many different circumstances. I can reframe that customer service thing as a dance straight away. It's like, I'm going to dance with this person, and if we can get the dance right, they're going to solve my problem. They're going to have a better day, and everybody's a winner. I'll be on the phone half the time. I'll come off with a smile on my face instead of exasperation. And I don't know how many circumstances where you've been taught to think of winning the situation or overcoming, but could you reframe any of those, Will, as an opportunity to dance with somebody to create something?
So I definitely can think about that. And I believe it comes from really the toxic capitalistic perspective of stuff, where it becomes how can we be able to win?
Right.
And but then I also believe that comes down to how men were raised about the story of this type of narrative. What is actually the narrative of our story? And for instance, if we were taught, and one of the things that was coming to my mind was you probably are familiar with the potato famine, the Irish when they actually got so most people don't realize that the reason that they came over to America because they were freeing being pretty much enslaved by the English, and they weren't able to have gold. They had one bad crop because the only thing that they were able to grow over there was potatoes. And if we were told a story about people over there that they were not able to grow, that they were only foolish enough to only grow potatoes and they didn't fish, they didn't do anything else, and they only know part of the story, then they actually are always going to regurgitate that to other people and also their kids.
Yeah.
So that's why I was saying before, going back to the history of why our parents taught us certain things, where boys don't cry. It's like I actually will say to other men, I say, crying is one of the healthiest ways for you to be able to explore those emotions. And if you really want to show up for somebody, the emotions that you are feeling might feel very uncomfortable. And if anything, very frustrating. But those emotions are also part of the words of that story that has been subtracted from being able to be heard. So it creates this narrative of incompletion.
Right. Right. Gosh, there's so much in what you just said. I mean, I love that you go back to what's regarded as a famine that drove a wave of Irish people to leave Ireland, and a lot of them came across to this country. Um, there was a blight on the potato crop, but at the same time, the English were exporting food from Ireland, not just potatoes, but other staple vegetables, um, exporting that to back into England and other places. So there wasn't an overall famine. The full story has to look at the historical facts that the English were causing the starvation of Irish people by restricting what they could grow, and when the blight came on the potato, that then they couldn't sustain themselves. So there's something really important there about us being educated enough to know where these stories come from, and that that leads us in different directions because the stories we live by
Mhm.
are very often manipulated in order to that people with power and control can continue to have power and control.
Mhm.
And so if you look today, there's this enormous energy going into telling men stories about how a man should be. And the language is often the traditional male model,
Mhm.
um, that we want traditional male behavior, and we want traditional wives alongside traditional men. And so there's a lot of focus in the cultural conversation about um, moving back toward those male models of male behavior and models of female behavior. And it's very easy to see that there's a political agenda behind that. And so when we hear people telling us that, in all sorts of aspects, telling us as men how we should behave, telling us how we should focus on being strong and healthy, telling us that we should be the major breadwinner, and telling us the different ways that we should show up. There's a political agenda that's being furthered by telling us how to show up. And we have to recognize that.
So I'll go beyond political. I believe it's more of a capitalistic way. And I'm not anti-capitalistic at all. I believe that there's a lot of strengths to it, but it's you having both sexes going to work. You have the narrative telling women this is the way that men keep you suppressed. But I was thinking about the traditional values. I was thinking, how much of a dance is it? How much of a dance was it where the guy, he would be able to open a door for you? The woman would actually do X, the man would do Y, and they would be able to flow interchangeably. And the other aspect was it was a give and take, and it goes back even to that customer service of, well, I should do this, you should do that. Very rigid. I'm not saying you were, but I'm saying that's how it was. I
Yeah.
was figuring it. But well, if that person's giving you the energy, how can I actually just be able to pivot it so I can actually understand, even if it's a very one-off, giving a person a smile loosens up their day. But then also on the same thing of, if a person is like your wife, your partner, even just a stranger, opening that door, even if you get rejected, of I could open that door myself. It's like you're very welcome, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
And it might come off still very prickly to you, but it's a way to be able to help change that narrative of, or that story that she's been told, like, hey, I don't need to be suppressed. The man doesn't need to do this for me.
Right.
We remember the things that emotionally hurt us. We
Mhm.
don't always remember what a person says or always actually makes us happy, but we remember the pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, this is rich conversation. And I'm not, there are several threads I'd love to pick up, but let's pick up the thread about the origin of some of these stories in capitalism.
Perfect.
So the way I think about it, there was a time. I mean, we can trace back to a time before human beings settled, when we lived as hunter gatherers,
Hmm.
and so we went where the food was. We went looking for food, and the food would be either game that was hunted,
Hmm.
or it would be crops that were growing in the natural environment. And we would perhaps follow where there were summer crops and then autumn crops, and move the whole tribe or community to
Hmm.
where there was a sufficient food. And then at some point, we began the process of planting seeds in the place where we were going to live and herding animals into the vicinity of where we lived, so that we had access to both plant and animal food.
Hmm.
And we began to settle down. And at that point, the first people that did that must have begun to appreciate perhaps there was a particularly bad winter.
Hmm.
Somebody had got more food stored for the winter than their neighbor. And initially, I'd like to think that we would have just shared amongst the community and helped each other out. But at some point, that surplus became an opportunity to exert power over other people. I've got enough food stored to see my family through the winter, and I'm going to prioritize that over the good of your family, or the good of the whole community. And so we began to have the idea of property. I own that surplus of food. it's mine, not yours. And therefore I have control over it, and I have power because I have control of that property. So the idea of property comes into our thinking.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about this happening 10,000 years ago.
Mhm.
But I'm also reflecting on what I've seen happening right now in the last 10 years in the Amazon rainforest. I've been privileged to travel there many times. And I know that there are extractive industries trying to persuade the local people, the indigenous people who live in the jungle, to align with their plans to extract oil or mine for minerals underneath the forest floor. And one of the ways they try to do that is to introduce to those indigenous people the idea that they are poor. So the story is, talk to the local people, convince them that they're poor, and the remedy is to say yes to the oil extraction because we will give them money. Now, in the language that's spoken by the Achuar people in Ecuadorian rainforest, there is no concept, there's no word for poor. There's no concept of poor. There's no concept of not having enough.
Mhm.
So what you see is the capitalist world, if you like, as it encounters this community of people, it has to begin to modify the language in order to impose the story of you don't have enough.
Mhm.
Therefore, you should come and work for me to have enough. So I've seen it unfolding with my, in front of my very own eyes, the way in which the story is created, and it requires new language
Mm.
to impose that worldview on people who don't even recognize the concepts involved because they haven't worked out of shortage or scarcity or poverty and don't even have language for it. So yeah, I mean, this is such a rich topic. So the origins of our desire to have property are way back in terms of the moment when we stepped out of being hunter-gatherers into the beginning of the agricultural revolution.
Mhm.
And that story has proceeded from there into the world we see at the moment, which is rampant consumerism.
Mhm.
Our desire to go out and extract whatever we can from whatever part of the planet we need to make the widgets, the gadgets, the clothes, the experiences that we're that are being advertised to us. And now, the demand for them is being stimulated by advertising companies telling us that we're insufficient as people if we don't have
Mhm.
this gadget or we don't look a particular, so we've come from not having language for property to a situation where we all think we haven't quite got enough of anything.
Mm.
It's an amazing story that's developed over 10,000 years to bring us to this point.
It was interesting. The book *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari. I don't know if you read that,
Yeah.
but it talks about how people were growing when they finally settled, and then all of a sudden they started having laws, and people were taking off the top to be able to be in control and create that sense of poverty and a hierarchy. And when you start talking about the Amazon rainforest, I don't remember the name of the book, but it was about the Monkey King. And they went over in there and they were looking for this lost generation of people.
Uh-huh.
And there was this Goldilocks effect of the altitude of where this indigenous region was living. And when they went over there, I'm trying to remember if it was Ecuador, it was Peru, but they were talking to the head military. And then the guy went back a year or two later and he cleared so much land. And it took so much of the antiques or the pottery of what they were looking for because they had the scarcity mindset of, hey, I would like this, I need this. But it's interesting about the way that you talk about it is it has fabricated this scarcity mindset to people that
Right.
the have or have not. Like the food that we have, and I will get back right into the conversation of this story of Native Americans who used to plant maize over here,
Mm.
and it'd be a bunch of different types of maize, and whatever grew is what they actually would use, and you have different types. But what I found interesting about learning about these three different topics is we are trying to make everything else conform to us, or we have people of, hey, it's a gain of how could we give up part of our resources for somebody else to control us. And when we go back to the story that we're telling ourselves, boys don't cry, but if we actually had teachers and parents that said, hey, why are you crying? Like, what is going on? I hurt myself.
Mm.
What happened? And met them with curiosity where they're able to explain it at a young age with that skill, it would actually wouldn't need as much of these issues. But now helping people become free, whole and free of what you have been doing, it's like helping them realize the past to be able to move forward.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And this sense of whole and free is, I mean, this underpins a lot of the work I do. So can I just spend a moment on it, what I mean by each of those words. When I talk about wholeness, what I'm very clear about is that each of us as human beings have access to a whole range of human qualities that are our birthright. And I don't know if you've ever had the privilege of being around newborn kids, but that's a place where I can certainly have a sense of the human essence inside each of us in the eyes of a newborn baby.
Hmm.
You can look into the eyes of a newborn baby and imagine that um, there is every human quality is available through this newborn. The qualities of curiosity, the qualities of joy, the qualities of kindness and patience, the qualities of courage and steadfastness, all of the qualities that allow us to be compassionate towards other people or to want to help other people. Every human quality is available to us as a human being until it's covered over with stories.
Hmm.
So, and we start making stories of the world the moment we're born, with the help of the people around us who are guiding and shaping our circumstances and guiding the way we respond to the world. But we're born with this access to these amazing qualities. But we perhaps find out that being kind gets us into trouble because mum's in a hurry and she doesn't want us to be kind at this moment. So she hurries us along and I was trying to be kind in that moment and mum didn't like it. We perhaps learn that kindness and the messages start to get laid down and the patterns are laid down and the stories evolve. So each of us have access to this wholeness, but it's covered over as stories. And the work we've got to do, Will, is to get rid of those stories.
Hmm.
We've got to surface them. We've got to see the price that we're paying for them. We've got to break the link with them, and we've got to insert new stories. And that's what I call freedom. So freedom comes when we can disempower the stories that are keeping us from our wholeness.
Hmm.
And then you're free to express. One of the things I love about you, Will, is your curiosity. You got a tremendous curiosity at a stage of life where not everybody's curious as you are any longer. By the time people have reached your age, a lot of people think they know how the world works, and they know how to operate in the world in their familiar ways. You've got this thirst for knowledge and perspective. that has you looking and studying and talking to different people. And so you're gaining freedom as you get more information and being able to express that innate curiosity that you've got. So that's what I mean when I say whole and free. And so to everybody listening, I encourage you to spend a moment reflecting on all the human qualities that are inside of you because you've been able to express them once or twice or a few times, but they don't come out often enough. And reflect on what's preventing me from being more of that intrinsically wonderful human being that is kind and patient and loving and strong and persevering and able to get things done, but able to encourage and motivate and support other people. What's coming between me and my ability to do that? And that's where you find the stories that are limiting you.
So when does a person typically come and find an individual like you?
Normally when they're in crisis. For men,
Mhm.
honestly, for men, it's when something's got so bad that it can't be endured any longer. Or it can't, or the decision's been taken out of our hands. So that very often looks like failure in relationship, failure in health, or financial problems. Those are the three trigger points. And I think you and I, from what we know about men who are suffering, we would like to see men able to ask for help way before they get into crisis.
So I look at crisis the same way I look at yelling at somebody, especially a partner.
Mhm.
When you yell at a partner that you love to tell them to stop doing something, you have raised the energy way higher than it should be to be able to get the compliance level that you want.
Right.
And the automation of what you were saying before, it creates this, but then it drags it down of how do we able to not only be in crisis, but now how do we get what we need to self-soothe? So like you and I are having something similar of we want to help people before they get to crisis
Mhm.
because when you go to crisis, a lot more resources are being spent on you. A lot more resources are you going to be spending to be able to take care of yourself. And helping somebody fabricate the sense of urgency of, hey, this story is not working. I would like to actually have a new narrative.
Mhm.
Like, what are some of the signs before a person gets to crisis or before financial trouble to search for a person like you?
Well, I think there's a couple of answers. One is the early stages of dysfunction.
Hmm.
So it might be before your health becomes critical. It might be that you just notice you don't have as much energy as you normally do, or you keep getting a cold from the kids, or that there's some way in which your health is compromised, but not yet at crisis level.
Hmm.
It might be that you notice in your relationship before it gets to be extraordinarily disrupted and in crisis, that you just notice that the light has gone out, or
Hmm.
the funds disappeared, or is much harder to kindle. So it might be the early stages of dysfunction. But the other thing, and this is, I think, a place where a lot of men go, is into a kind of numbness.
Hmm.
And the numbness is more dangerous because we sometimes don't recognize it. It's as if our life force has just got dimmed
Hmm.
generally. um, and we can't easily attribute it to one thing or another. And so it can end up in this sort of numbness, this a mild or more than mild depression,
Hmm.
which is just it's just that place of feeling stuck, feeling marooned, feeling um, unenthusiastic about life. That's actually a telltale sign that something's not working, and that somehow the stories are keeping us from our life force. Yeah.
Being numb is, to me, it's almost like a hoarder. that keeps throwing everything into a room,
Hmm.
and they just keep piling it on, piling it on, piling it on. Because as soon as you turn the switch back on, you're still going to get blasted in the face with all those emotions.
Right.
And when I look at that way of thinking of how do you help convince a person to do the hard work in the beginning, to delay that gratification in the beginning, to be able to say, hey, these are some of the things that you can be seeing. That mild depression that becomes a normal, the numbness, which becomes their own homeostasis now
Mm.
because they are choosing not to. So when a person is meeting you and saying, hey, John, this is what's going on. My wife left. I'm about to get evicted. I'm about to lose my house foreclosed. Job is not working. What is something that you would say to me?
Well, there's a couple of places I always try and establish some common ground. Really, the first is I would talk about and not necessarily in this order, but I would talk about wholeness and freedom, and the way stories get in the way of us expressing our innate human qualities.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I want to see, I want people to see there's a mechanism by which they've gotten into the place that they've gotten to,
Mm,
so that you didn't get to be on the point of eviction without some things having gone the wrong way in the lead up to that. And so we can see that that's the end point of a progression, which is itself got its origins in the stories we're telling ourselves. So I want to lay down that sort of basic framework with a man when I first start talking to him.
perfect.
And then I want to normalize this, because every single man has similar problems. Every single man listening has got similar problems. Not the same. Your experience of life and mine are very different, but we've got the same kind of things going on. We recognize some of the stories that we've been told in the culture and how we are supposed to man up to meet the moment. We 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 can see that when we break it down, we can see, yeah, there are stories that I inherited that are keeping me from shining my light, keeping me from enjoying my life fully. And so I want to normalize whatever situation a guy's in, and say it's normal that you're having an experience like this. The fingerprint of it, the exact dimensions of it are yours, just as my own issues are uniquely mine. But we're suffering in the same categories. This is this is how life works. So we're normalizing it. Then I want to build rapport with whoever I'm talking to. I'm not talking to anybody else because I'm better than them,
Mm,
or I've got all the answers that they don't. What I am is somebody who's got some answers because I've gone through some of these problems. I've gone through my version of these problems myself, and I've learned something from it. And I want to kind of share what I've learned. In a way, we're walking the path together. And at this moment in time, I might have more resourcefulness than the guy next to me, and I might be able to help him out.
mm.
But all of that has come about because at different times I was walking alongside somebody else who was more resourceful than I wasn't, and he helped me. So I'm trying to get a common worldview. I'm trying to have people recognize that having difficulty with life is normal. And then I want to build rapport so that we can start to talk honestly and vulnerably about what's going on. Yeah.
I love the way that you just talked about normal commonality. It's really meeting them where they're at and not trying to push them to somewhere they're not.
Right.
It's it's rather impressive. There's so many different ways that people try to connect with an individual. Some people are very logically driven, some people are emotionally driven, and other people need to be shown. And my last profession, I did a lot of showing people based off of my own failures. And what's interesting, and I'm curious about your perspective on this, when you start seeing that aha moment, when they start saying, hey, John, when you got to this point, what helped you? Or, John, I'm starting to actually feel this way, but this is what I want to do. And it's starting to regain their footing. And they'll start asking you a question. And you can already see that they know the answer, but they're starting to get that reassurance. Like, it's one of the most beautiful things that you can ever do. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you just said it. To help somebody realize the answer to their own predicament, to help somebody find the next step they want to take, is the most powerful way of helping them. And so it's about facilitating somebody coming to their own answer.
Mhm.
And that's a process that's led by questions, not by suggestions. It's led by curiosity, not advice. And so we say, well, if you could think of the next step to take, what would it be? Now, not that, so I would always try to lead with that kind of approach. Not everybody has been trained to be able to think for themselves to the degree that they can easily come up with answers. Unfortunately, our education system tends to reward behavior that says, here's a problem, there's an answer. If you don't know it, you don't know it. We don't tend to teach people to solve problems in the core education processes that we have. So sometimes we do need to help people and provide answers, provide models to follow, provide suggestions for next steps. But it's always more powerful when you know this in your own life. I know it from my own. If I come up with the solution to my predicament, I'm like, that's what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell me what to do, I'll be like, okay, let's try it. Might be great. Never quite as powerful as when you found it yourself.
So I love the way that you just explained it, because that's how it used to be at my old job. My They used to say to me, "Oh, how come you get away with so much?" I'm like, "Well, I have a problem, and I give the boss about three solutions, and I think about some of the hangups, and I'm going to them to just pretty much give me the okay of how to run with it." And
Right.
it's like, this is an issue. I'm not going to come to you with issues if I don't have solutions, because all I'm going to be doing is nagging you. And then, two, I want you out of my hair, and I want to be able to figure it out. But because, like, it is so rewarding. It's like, shit, trying to do a podcast. I'm like, how do I learn about microphones? How do I learn about cameras? And I'm like, this is so overwhelming. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, really not. It's just like if you're trying to find whatever you're trying to find, it is the same skill set. And
Yeah.
it's just going back to what was the basics that we learned. Like, your chain falls off your bike, you have to put the chain back on. Some people will take the tire off every single time. Some people will take apart the chain each time. Other
Right.
people will figure out ways to navigate what they have. And if you're not having that curious mind, you're going to always go back to what is true to you. And for me,
Yeah.
it was always putting the chain on, kicking the wheel forward. And I didn't really think about until somebody else came in my life and said, you got to tighten the back wheel so it has more resistance towards it. But then all of a
Yeah.
sudden it creates another issue. And then all of a sudden it has another issue. And it's like, but when you have a person that has patience with you and meeting you with that type of love, you realize that that problem is an opportunity to connect with somebody.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it is. And I'm reminded by what you're saying of, I've spent a little bit of time. I've been blessed to have some teachers who are from the native peoples of North America and wise in their ways, and been struck almost every instance I can think of. There is very little teaching that happens in that culture. There's a lot of learning that happens, but it's not as if you go to an elder and say, "Teach me how to build a fire." What you'll be invited to do is go and spend some time hanging out with the people that are building the fire, and they won't tell you they won't tell you directly what they're doing or what you should do. Very often they'll answer any questions you've got, and they'll do what they do, and they'll do it in a way that you can see and observe what's happening. And so what's getting stimulated there is curiosity and learning, rather than here's the way to do it. It's a teaching, do it this way, which is ultimately more disempowering, as we said. So I think it's really interesting, the relationship we have between how things get transmitted, how we learn things in our culture, and of course we've become very impatient. So we want knowledge now, and we want a YouTube video that's going to tell us how to do it, and we want that video. We used to be able to tolerate a 20-minute video, but now we actually want a 3-minute video that's going to give us the same information. It's interesting how our mindset has shifted with that one. Yeah. But there's something I want to say, if I can. We've touched on. You introduced the idea that the stories we live by will have origins, and there's something I'd love to offer to every man that's listening to this. And I invite us to imagine the line of our fathers' going back in time.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time when your family line reached back to the age of the hunter-gatherers. And there was a time when your father lived without the stories that have been imposed since we settled into communities and we began the agricultural revolution, and since the times when we became used to having organized violence against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned this from a man called Stephen Jenkinson, the idea that, and this is what the Romans did when they invaded indigenous communities in Europe. If they defeated a community, they would say, you have a choice. You can either surrender to us and we will allow you to continue to live, or if you don't surrender, we will kill you and we'll rape your women and children. And if you surrender to us, we're going to put you in the Roman army. So you will join our army. And so if you could imagine that someone in your family line was put in that position.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from the UK. I know the stories of the Romans invading Britain. I can imagine that situation happen. And what I'm pointing to here is the tremendous pressure that was put on men to co-opt them into a world of violence organized against other people. We were co-opted into living in a patriarchal culture.
Mm-hmm.
In your family line, in my family line, Will, there was a time before that happened. And then at some point, some particular generation of men were put through this terrible, violent process where we were co-opted to join the army that would then march to another country, another place, and threaten to kill or subsume into the patriarchal army the men of that country.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we men are inside the culture that rests on violence organized against others,
Mm-hmm.
violence against the earth, that we are inside that culture is because of the tremendous energy that was used to co-opt us.
Hmm.
And some men resisted and would have been killed because they would not abandon the sacred communion with the earth, the sacred communion with their culture, the sacred communion with their community. But many, in the line of history, men were co-opted into this way. So men are not intrinsically violent. We're not intrinsically the problem, but an enormous amount of energy has been put into taming us, co-opting us, and keeping us inside of this culture where men lead the oppression of women and children, all other forms of life, and the planet herself. And I like to offer that perspective to all of the listeners, because I think it gives us an understanding of how we got to be educated the way we are as men. Yeah.
So I'll let you know about 50% of the listeners are females, and not
Right.
surprising. It's interesting. It's while you were talking, I was thinking about Alexander the Great, where when he was taking over areas, he would actually have his men marry into them, have kids, and he would push for this narrative. But it's so interesting that either violence or compliance, and it was these extremes. And in violent situations, you don't have the ability for those emotions. Like the Athenians, even though they were a lot softer than Spartans, they actually had a lot more emotions into plays and craftsmanship, and they had a lot more of their personal. And I'm curious about your perspective. And I know that we're about almost at an hour, but I'm curious about your perspective of men with hobbies.
Men with hobbies. Gosh, I couple of things come to mind. One is my dad, who's no longer with us, but for years he was a gardener, and in the UK there's a sort of a tradition where if you don't have a large enough garden in your own property, or you don't own a property, they have communal spaces called allotments where you can go and get a patch of land, and you can grow fruit, vegetables, flowers, whatever you want there. My dad kept an allotment for probably 30 years. And there was something about that hobby that kept him connected to the earth and kept him connected to himself in a way that he wouldn't otherwise have been. And then I think of the hobbies of that are about making something or creating something. That might be creating something with wood or other materials. I think of that. I think of my own passion for visual arts, painting. And there's something, I think it taps into our human essence, that wholeness I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think certain types of hobby can connect us into some fundamental parts of ourselves, the desire to create. We're all creative, but we probably met a teacher that convinced us that we weren't. Well, and so there's some deep satisfaction about creating something with your hands, or putting your hands in the earth. So I think of those things, and I think it's a way of connecting us with the parts of us that don't get expressed in today's technological age. I don't need to make, my job doesn't involve me making it. My job needs 10 digits mostly, or my voice. So it's yeah, that's what comes to mind for me.
And then to wrap it up, what is a message that you would like to share with people, and where can they actually find you?
Right. Thank you. So I'm going to come back to you are whole and can be free. Everybody listening, men and women, everything I've said about stories relates to women as well. They're just different stories. So whether you're listening as a man, you're listening as a woman, you're listening with any other identification, you have a wholeness, you have access to an enormous array of human qualities. Don't ever forget that. Whatever the world has done to help you forget it, please hold on to the sense that of this innate human, fabulous humanness that you have, and know that it's been covered over with stories. And that the work of uncovering the stories and removing the stories that keep you from that essence is the work of coming free, becoming more alive in the world. And that applies to everybody that's listening. It applies to you, Will, and it applies to me. That's why I call the work I do with men, the brand I created is called Whole and Free. And the place in response to your second part of that question, I have a website which is wholeandfree.me, wholeandfree.me. And if you drop that in the show notes, I'd be super grateful. And if you go there, you'll find how to contact me. You'll find some resources, some ideas, some tools, free tools that men can get a hold of and begin to regain some knowledge of and control over their inner world.
Well, I appreciate you making the time, John. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and I realize that we can go off on so many tangential areas, but at the same time, I enjoy speaking to a person that has a similar language as me, but just slightly different, just to be able to have thought-provoking conversations.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing the array of your knowledge is amazing, that you can pick out examples from ancient Greece or from modern day events. Thank you for bringing all of your curiosity to the work you're doing, which is to bring help to men who are looking for more options, looking for ways to exert some more control in their own lives. Thank you for the work you're doing, Will, and thanks for having me on the show. I super enjoyed it.